with the release of Warlords Ruin, there are now 8 amazing dungeons within Destiny. And I think overall, like, dungeons are the most consistently awesome piece of content. They all offer something unique. They're all very cool and I think play really well. And because of that, a large part of the player base is pretty split on what their favorites and least favorites are. And that means no one's going to like this list and I'm gonna get absolutely flamed by everyone, but that's all right. They're still a lot of fun to put together. So we're gonna rank them from 8 to 1, least favorite to most favorites. Before we get started, we are very close to 100,000 subscribers. So if you enjoy this type of video, make sure to subscribe. We got a lot of cool stuff coming on the channel. So let's start with number 8. I just want to reiterate, I really like this dungeon, but there has to be a number 8. And I'm gonna put Prophecy. I think Prophecy just hasn't aged super well for me. I do really love the uniqueness of the mechanic where it's, you know, spawns a different type of moat depending on where you're standing. From a technical standpoint, that's really awesome. And I think it plays really well in a lot of the dungeon. I think it's a lot of fun. I think my main problem with this dungeon is that it has a pacing issue. So you start off, you're going pretty fast. The first boss has no health, kind of a pushover. You can just blow through it. Pretty unique experience, rotating room and ring and stuff. I think that's pretty cool. And once again, leverages that light mechanic where the light and dark areas are constantly switching throughout the fight. That's pretty cool. Then you hit the Wasteland, which is an absolute slog. Then you go to the Cube Room, which is, you know, stationary, sloggy, like it's an all right pace. Then you go back to the Wasteland and you have to go through Rainbow Road, which is pretty cool, but it has a 45-second respawn timer, which is ridiculous. Then you get to the final boss, which is actually really cool. I do really enjoy the final boss of this dungeon. Like I said, I do really like this dungeon. It's got some pretty cool armor. A lot of the loot was really fun at the time that it came out, although loot for me is less important than the replayability of the dungeon generally. So that's where a lot of my distinctions are gonna come in. A lot of people really favor the quality of loot. I'm running these dungeons like 50 times each, you know? So I care more about how replayable a piece of content is generally. And with Prophecy, I'll still go and do prophecies, but I just think that like pacing changing throughout the entire thing really kind of messes with me. It's not my favorite piece of content in the world, but I still think it's a really good dungeon. In the number 7 slot, we have Spire of the Watcher. Once again, I do really like this dungeon, but I do have problems with it. I think some of the traversal sections are a little tedious. The whole going up and then down thing is fine, but it's not really my favorite thing in the entire world. I don't like the first boss that much. I just think it has entirely too much health. The damage phase is a little weird. It's fine, but it's, you know, it's not my favorite thing in the entire world. That being said, the final boss absolutely carries this dungeon so much. That is an incredible fight. Easily one of the best dungeon encounters we've ever had. I really do like the flow of that encounter, going back and forth between the two rooms and trapping the boss, and then kind of the opposite type of damage phase from the first boss. The first boss kind of, you know, runs away from you. This boss is coming towards you and you have to be really careful and it can be pretty dangerous. I do really like the connect the dots mechanic. I know a lot of people don't. I like it because it allows you to master that mechanic more than most other dungeon mechanics in the game, or most other mechanics in the game. Because the dots or the nodes never change, you can learn like very specific patterns to, you know, more efficiently connect both of the lines on each of the floors, or both the lines in the boss room, for instance, and you can complete that mechanic very fast. So it really promotes that sort of like speedrunning perfectionist mentality, which I think is something that we don't have a lot of in Destiny, or enough of. And I think it's a pretty cool way of, you know, fostering that type of mentality in this sort of activity, which is pretty cool. I really do think that mechanic is interesting. Not interesting enough to have in this and then Root of Nightmares, but it was pretty interesting in this. So overall, pretty good dungeon. I love the loot aesthetic. The aesthetic of the dungeon is kind of like, you know, war-mindy. We've already done it 100 times, nothing really that crazy. So I'm gonna rank it at number 7. Number 6, I have Duality. Now, probably the most controversial dungeon. There are a million people that love Duality, and there are a million people that hate Duality. I think most of the hate is due to a lot of the bugginess when it first launched. I just think it is a very tedious dungeon. I'm not a big fan of a lot of the traversal sections. I like the idea of jumping in and out of the mind realm. I think that's really cool, but it doesn't really lend itself to a lot of there's a lot of waiting. You have to wait for your teammates a lot. If you're soloing it, that's a different experience, and a lot of these things are going to be completely different if we're ranking them based off of solo experience. But based off of, you know, the team experience, there's a lot of waiting for people generally, or waiting for me generally. There is, you know, that mechanic's fine. It's used differently in all of the fights, which is kind of cool. In the first fight, I'm not a big fan of kind of the Galron flow of the fight. It's not really that much different than anything we've done before. It's just kind of like a standard fight. I absolutely despise the second encounter. I think it is so slow, and once again runs into like a pacing issue where you're running. Second encounter, all right, now you have to be really slow because you're forced to do this thing in X amount of turns. And then running to the final boss, Keitel, which I do think absolutely carries this dungeon. I farmed Keitel like 1 billion times for Artifice Armor like a year ago, and it was like genuinely a really enjoyable experience. I think the Keitel fight really lends itself to that sort of mastery once again. The flow is really cool. I really do like the DPS phase and kind of how it changes a little bit based off of like what battle she goes to. I just think that entire fight flows really well. I do really enjoy it, and I think it carries the dungeon. A lot of the loot is really good from this dungeon. The aesthetic is absolutely peak in this dungeon. Overall, just a really good time. It's number 6 on this list. In the number 5 slot, we have the Grasp of Avarice. And I've talked about pacing issues a couple of times. This is like pacing issues, the dungeon, but everything else is really good. So first off, I love the fanfare in this dungeon. The music is incredible. I love the idea of going into the loot cave and boom, it's actually like this huge underground crazy system of networks that you know, has like pirate stuff and traps, and I think that's genuinely a really great idea for a dungeon. I think they executed it really well. All of the loot is incredible. Even if I'm not like I mentioned, loot is not like a huge factor for me. It is just undeniable how many amazing weapons came from this dungeon. The armor is amazing in this dungeon, and I think it does a really good job of kind of onboarding you to it. So like that initial trap section, really fun to troll your friends with, but once you learn it, you can go through it pretty fast. The first boss, the ogre, really awesome encounter. The sparrow section, I really enjoy. I think that's a great encounter. The shields encounter, holy, this is easily what I would consider to be the worst dungeon encounter in the entire game. So you're like, you start the dungeon, you're speeding through traps, ogre boss speeding through, sparrows speeding through literally. You hit the shield mechanic, you're required to go 4 rounds. I think if they wanted to make this like dungeon better, and I don't know why Bungie doesn't do this ever, like revisit content to make it better. Grasp of Avarice, that shield encounter, you shorten it to 3 shields. You only have to destroy 3 of the nodes, and you make it so all 3 of the servitors spawn at the same time, so you can split up with your fire team and do it simultaneously. Boom, you fix the encounter right there. You make this one of easily the best dungeons in the game with that simple change right there. That's all they need to do. So that entire encounter sucks. It is so long, it takes longer than the rest of the dungeon combined. The final boss is nothing really to write home about. It's fine, I guess. It's just a pretty standard boss fight. I prefer the ogre fight in this dungeon, to be completely honest. Fria is really cool. Overall though, like a pretty simple, nice little dungeon, really awesome fanfare, great aesthetics, that sort of thing. So I'm gonna give it the number 5 spot on this list. In the number 4 slot, we have Pit of Heresy. This is another super controversial dungeon, and in my opinion, very underrated. I'm not sure why people hate on it so much, to be completely honest. It's a pretty chill experience. The mechanics are pretty interesting, actually. I love the fact that they took something that's been in the franchise for a really long time, Crota Sword, and they split it up into like 3 separate mechanics in a pretty interesting way. Like, I think they did that really well. The first encounter, this is a really cool take on the kind of go chase and kill this thing in this specific fashion type of encounter. That's a pretty common encounter in Destiny, but they did it where you're just scaling a single wall and you have to do all sorts of maneuvering and stuff. I think that's really cool. I love how it changes every single time you do the encounter. overall, I think that's like a pretty solid opening encounter, to be completely honest. You can split up with your friends and get it done faster. Pretty cool. I love the traversal sections, especially the first one where you're hiding from the ogres and you have to go into the secret rooms and get the orbs and stuff. I think that's like genuinely really cool and very unique. The totem encounter, maybe not the most unique thing in the world, since, you know, orcs or the taking King's Fall Holy did it, but really still kind of interesting. You have to go, you know, 5 or 6 rounds, I think. A ton of enemies spawn. Not bad at all, though. Like, pretty good ad density, that sort of thing. The next traversal section I don't like. I wish they would have simplified that, where you have to find the 3 symbols. I'm not a big fan of that one. But Zolmak, the final boss, is once again genuinely like a pretty cool final boss encounter. Like, I think the flow of this dungeon is pretty good all around. There's not any major pacing issues or anything like that. I think the biggest thing hurting this dungeon is there is like no loot. I think there might be like maybe the perdition or whatever, the pulse rifle might only come from this dungeon, I think, possibly. But other than that, it has like 0 loot. It just drops like moon stuff. Not that interesting, but a pretty good replayable experience in my opinion. So the number 4 slot. In the number 3 slot, we have Ghost of the Deep. Ghost of the Deep is what I consider to be like the perfect dungeon to do one time. If you run Ghosts the first time, it is just such an epic experience. Like this huge conquest through the archaeology, through underwater. You find the corpse of Oryx. I think a lot of the boss fights are really cool. So the first encounter sucks. Once again, like you're required to do 4 rounds and you have to do them 1 at a time. It's super tedious. We gotta stop that. We have to stop that. There's not a single thing in this game that is made better requiring you to do it 4 times over 3 times, especially in 3-man activities. It never works. Stop doing it, please, Bungie. I beg you, okay? First encounter, it's awful. Bad, awful, bad. The traversal sections are really cool the first time you do them. On replay, you know, attempts of this dungeon, they just take too long. The underwater mechanic slows you down too long. You can't well skate. You can't, you know, eager edge skate. You can't Icarus dash skate. You can't heat rises skate. You can't shatter skate. You can't do any of these things. You just have to walk at a crawling pace and hope that your teammate doesn't take a bubble that you need, or else you're waiting 15 or 30 seconds and having to respawn way further back. The traversal sections, I think, really put a damper on this raid. No pun intended. Ekthar is genuinely one of the best dungeon fights in this game. I really love the use. This is the only part in this dungeon where the underwater mechanics are like, oh yeah, that's actually like pretty cool. Where you're slowed and there's a boss chasing you and he will wreck your shit. That's awesome. That is really cool. I love the searching for symbols mechanics. I think just the flow of this whole Ekthar encounter is really cool. I think he's got a pretty good amount of health. The overshields are unnecessary, but it is what it is. I think this is just a pretty fun encounter. More traversal, kind of tedious, less tedious than the first part. The final boss with the fire team, really, really good fight. The underwater mechanics, completely unnecessary. You could just take those out and the fight would be exactly the same. I really like how different of a boss fight it is. It's not very often we have like a moving floating boss. I wish maybe she was a little bit more predictable, but overall, like, still a pretty cool type of boss that we don't have a lot. I love the mechanics, doing a ritual, stopping them from resurrecting Oryx. Like, the lore implications there are really cool. It feels really good to do. Solo, I admit, a ton of health. Like, come on, you know, I thought they were gonna adjust it at some point, but just so much health. But the aesthetic of this dungeon is really, really awesome. The loot in this dungeon is really, really cool. Navigator is awesome. I think Ghost of the Deep, if you were only running the dungeons once, would be the top of this list. But once again, I base a lot of this off of replayability, and so I still really enjoy running that dungeon, but it definitely is hurt by like a couple of very tedious things. So that's why it's number 3 on this list. In the number 2 spot, we have the Shattered Throne. Now, anyone who's been around this channel for quite a bit knows I'm not a very nostalgic person, and that causes me to be pretty hypercritical of old content generally. But I don't know what it is of Shattered Throne. I love this dungeon. It is just super chill. there is no pacing issue in my opinion. I think you can fly through it. It feels really good. The mechanics are not really the most complex things in the entire world, but they're pretty good. Like I genuinely don't mind the first like hide and seek portion. Is kind of cool. I like how it randomizes and it's fun to speed through. The traversal sections are fine. I like Thrallway, rest in peace. The ogre boss is fine. It's a pretty fun encounter. I really like doing it solo. I like doing it with a fire team. Duel and Karu, the final boss, I love how you can complete it in 30 seconds if you know what you're doing. It's genuinely, once again, pretty fun encounter. Like I don't really have anything bad to say about this dungeon other than the loot, but it also just kind of got like a soft refresh. I think if Bungie, once again, they should revisit this dungeon at some point, give it rally flags and up the ad density a little bit. And I think once again, it would shoot to the top of a lot of people's lists. There's just something I find super enjoyable about this dungeon from a solo experience. Anytime I'm bored or I need to warm up, like every time we have a day one raid race, I always warm up by going in and doing a solo flawless Shattered Throne. Like it's just a super chill run through this experience. It's a lot of fun and it's just my happy place. I just really enjoy this dungeon. I don't know what it is about it other than just saying like, I just feel good running this dungeon, and that's why it's the number 2 on this list. Number 1, Warlords Ruin. Now, I am incredibly aware that this came out 2 weeks ago, and I'm very cautious to put new content at the top of any of my lists. That's actually why I waited so long to make this video. I wanted to give it a couple weeks. I've ran it quite a few times at this point, and I still really enjoy it. I think it is going to age very well. I love the structure of this dungeon, the 3 bosses, and like no puzzly mechanics or tedious mechanics. I think that's awesome. I like how each of the 3 bosses are quite different and they utilize the totem mechanic in a different way. I like how the totem mechanic has that mastery over it once again, where you're rewarded for getting more and more of the totems activated with longer damage phases or more of the fireballs in the ogre encounter, for instance. I think that's pretty cool. The traversal sections of this dungeon, there are like traps and fake pathways and stuff, but once you know the way to go, it's not that long of a dungeon. The traversal sections are shortened significantly. I just think overall, like it just flows really well. The aesthetic is amazing. The soundtrack is amazing. I don't know how else to put it. I really love how unique the final boss is. It's got like just a different flow than anything we've seen in Destiny. It's kind of like an abstract take on the Riven fight. You know what I mean? It's like you fight on this platform and then you go up and you fight there and then you go up and you fight there. And then there's like a big damage phase and then you reset to the bottom. In an abstract way, that's the Riven fight. Riven's Ahamkara. In this one, you're fighting a meatball with Ahamkara teeth, and it's gaining like the eyes like a Ahamkara has. You know, it's like just a fun little thing, I guess, a little nod to that fight. But overall, like this dungeon just feels good to be in. I have really enjoyed playing with a ton of people and running through this dungeon. It's just fun. The loot's not the best in the world. I think that's more of a problem with like where we are in Destiny with how power crept we are right now. It's hard to make a lot of interesting loot, but overall, Warlords Ruin is a dungeon that I don't have many, if any, critiques on. It is just a great, really fun experience, and I hope it ages as well as I think it will. So that is my list of the worst to the best dungeons. Please let me know yours down in the comment section below. I hope you guys did enjoy this video. Once again, please subscribe to help us on the road to 100,000 subscribers. Have a fantastic day. Love your faces, and I'll see you very soon. See ya.